Hello and welcome back to the Christian Century YouTube channel. I'm John, joined today by one of our writers, Melissa Kuipers, who has written a piece called Shiny Happy Confrontations. So we will be talking about her year as an intern in one of the ministries of Teen Mania. Before we dive into all that, Melissa, welcome. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, thanks, John. Happy to be here. Yeah, so I am a writer. I write spiritual writing, fiction, creative nonfiction. I probably write too many different things, but I'm the author of a short story collection called The Whole Beautiful World. And I've spent about 15 years doing different kinds of ministry, campus ministry, youth ministry, family ministry, and have also taught at some Christian universities and teach creative writing.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, thanks for joining us today. So, some people listening right now to us may have just watched Shiny Happy People season two, that's about Teen Mania. They may know all about it. Others may have never heard of this before. So, could you give us just a really brief introduction to the now defunct ministry of Teen Mania and specifically the Honor Academy that you were a part of?
Yeah, for sure. So Teen Mania started in the 80s and had its heyday in the 90s and the first century of the 2000s. It was probably the most popular, biggest youth ministry in its era, and it would run these massive stadium events where we get thousands of teenagers together for a youth conference on the weekend called Acquire the Fire. That's probably how most people experienced Teen Mania. They had, I think, over 3 million people, they estimate, attended Acquire the Fire over the years, and that would get them all pumped up and on fire for Jesus. And then they would use Acquire the Fire to advertise their summer mission trip programs, where they would send thousands of teens all over the world to do short term evangelistic ministry trips. I did one to Guatemala. And then they had a few different other ministries, a summer camp program, and one of the most profitable branches of the Honor Academy was its, or sorry, of Teen Mania was its Honor Academy, which was an internship where recent high school grads were encouraged to come and live on their beautiful campus in Texas and spend a year discovering God's calling for your life. And so it was advertised as this opportunity to grow, to be surrounded by other people who are passionate about their faith in Jesus, to be helping serve in missions, doing the frontline work that we were excited about. And so I joined about, I think there were about 500 youth, young adults. The year that I went during one of its years when it was really strong, powerful ministry. And we would essentially work full-time jobs for the ministry, paying to be there. So most of us worked call center jobs. There were other jobs on campus, like running the cafeteria, things like that. And so we took classes there, learned from the people who led this ministry, learned a lot of really valuable lessons, as I highlight in the article, like how to confront people well, which is something I don't think most people know how to do, and especially young people. And we also learned what I think was a lot of spiritual baggage and just bad and harmful theology.
And in this essay, you go into some of this baggage, and I wanted to go right to the part of the essay that you said is difficult to talk about or write about. So sorry for that. But it's about the culture at a place like Honor Academy. And you describe it this way, I'm reading from the essay. The program's complex, pervasive messaging of self-denial, self-scrutiny, and obsession with sin convinces teens that they are responsible for curbing the sin lurking in every person. Everyone out there, I checked with Melissa before we started recording that the reason this is difficult to talk about is not because it immediately brings up a trauma response. But I'm curious if you could tell us what it is that makes it challenging to describe this kind of culture to folks now.
One of the things that makes it hard is when you hear the values of the Honor Academy and what they stood for, and if you have watched their promotional material, which is still out there online, the organization has been dead for 10 years. But there are still a lot of people who believe very strongly in what they were taught there, and many of us who have really critiqued it. So, one of the things that makes it difficult is that the values were so much about self improvement and growth and growing closer to Jesus and this really rigorous spiritual development. And so, that's something that a lot of people can get behind. But trying to describe just how deep this sense of constantly being on guard against the sin that might crop up in your own brain at any given second and the sin that you might see in somebody else, I think that's the part that's really difficult to explain, because there were just so many levels, so many layers to how culture of spiritual anxiety, how that was put on us as interns. And so it was, conveyed through the constant assessments that we had to do. We were meeting with accountability partners every week who were supposed to be asking us fairly intrusive questions about our spiritual lives, about our prayer lives, about our sexual lives, which we weren't really supposed to have any. Um, about our eating, all these different things. We had weekly accountability cards where we had to check ourselves off on having completed all the requirements. There were monthly evaluations where our roommate, the person we lived with who saw us day to day, had to evaluate us on a scale of 1 to 5 in categories like, how are you relating to the opposite sex? Are you eating well? Are you exercising enough? And then there were, quarterly evaluations from our residence advisors and our workplace advisors. There were all of those levels just built into the system, plus a constant teaching of, you have wicked, evil sin deep in your heart. That was one of the first things that an intern said to me when I came to campus. And I thought they were being a little melodramatic. And then I heard it from the front from our teachers saying this message: you have wicked, evil sin in your heart, and God wants to root it out. And when you're getting that constant messaging, you can't trust yourself. You're constantly on guard. And then we were also told that if you love the people that are around you, you're going to warn them if they are stepping towards sin. If you see somebody walking towards a pit, you're going to stop them and say, whoa, 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 you're going to harm yourself if you keep going in this direction. And so it was very much laid upon us that if you care about other people, you're going to confront them. And if you're disobeying a rule, God has put these authority figures in your life. So anytime you're disobeying a rule, that's sin. So you see someone walking on the grass, that was really drilled into us: don't walk on the grass. For good reason. I get why they don't want people walking on the grass. It's Texas, it gets worn out quickly, but that was something that you had to confront. So if I saw somebody, I would make my way over there and, very gently, abiding by the skills that we were taught, be like, hey, I know we're kind of in a rush, but just remember we're not supposed to walk on the grass. And yeah, kind of someone like me who had at a young age been really obsessed with being good and goodness being very key to what it meant to follow God. I took every opportunity I could to confront other people in a way that actually became not helpful, both to myself and to them.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. Gosh, tragically relatable in some sense to many of the ministries I've been a part of. But speaking of those confrontations, the last thing I wanted to ask you about, at the very beginning and very end of the essay, you talk about a group conversation at the very end of your internship. You're hanging out with some of your fellow interns, sharing memories, and they're sharing first impressions of each other. And their stories of their first impressions of you kind of are all along that theme of like you saying, "Please don't walk on the grass." But at the end of the piece, you say this really was a significant moment. It was like an intervention, you said, and it seemed to really be the beginning of you maybe moving away from that kind of faith. I wonder if you could tell us a bit more of why that conversation ended up playing such a significant role for you.
Yeah, that conversation was really important because my impression of my confrontations to these women who by this point at the end of the year, we've gone through a lot together. I have deep admiration for them. I've, shared a lot with them and been very vulnerable with them. My impression of our relationship was that we all confront each other from time to time. And I didn't have really lasting memories of those times when I had said, hey, that shirt might be a little too short when you raise your arms. I can see your midriff. Maybe wear a undershirt underneath, or those kind of conversations that I had. They didn't stick with me, at least not to the same degree that they did with these women. But several women around the table said to me, yeah, I remember my first impression is this. And I realized that, for them, the emotional vulnerability of being confronted was this really poignant moment. For them to have made that their first memory of them, that was probably one of the most intense emotional experiences they had had with me. And for that to have been a negative one really hit me hard. I just felt so awful. As much as I was confrontation happy, I also was really hard on myself, plucking the log out of my own eye while I was looking for the speck in other people's eyes. Um, and so, yeah, I took their comments to heart. And they also, in some ways, were able to give me this. I don't think they intended to confront me. They hadn't talked beforehand and said, hey, we need to create this opportunity to tell Melissa she confronts too much. But they actually very gently recognized why, because we were in this environment that told us to do this. And they said, you were just following the rules better than the rest of us. But they were very generous and graceful in the way that they confronted me. But I also came to the end of the year and realized that that confrontation happy attitude I had inhibited me from being truly vulnerable with other people and from developing the kind of intimate friendships that I wanted with other people, the kinds of relationships that led to true spiritual growth. I don't think I could have articulated it in that moment, but I think I realized that I was looking for what other people were doing wrong. And that wasn't ultimately really helping them grow spiritually. That wasn't helping us develop the kind of relationship where we could really truly encourage each other. And I was graduating, gonna go back home and start at a university closer to home. And I realized I had the opportunity for a fresh start, to be a different kind of person spiritually, and I wanted to do that. And so in some ways that was a really important first step. I wouldn't say that I was ready at that point to really start deconstructing my Honor Academy experience. That really was a very gradual process that didn't start in full fledged for probably 10 years after I graduated. But I was able to slowly see the way that some of the teachings had problematic implications, and that the way that I was living them out was dangerous. I was able to step back and say, okay, this isn't who I want to be spiritually. I had spent so long internalizing this idea that you need to put everyone on a spiritual hierarchy. You need to meet somebody and say, okay, is this person less strong than me spiritually or more strong? Are they someone that I look up to? Are they someone I meet with so then I can be close friends with? Or are they someone who's less strong so then therefore I keep them at a distance? And suddenly in that moment, it was just like that sense of spiritual hierarchy just like fell away. I felt like, no, that makes no sense. That's not something I want to carry with me. That's not the kind of faith that I want to live out. I just want to take people as they are and grow in pursuing Jesus together, and whatever that looks like. I'm sure that if you ask my first year university roommates, they would probably say that I maybe still confronted a little too much. Maybe I hadn't fully learned my lesson, but I definitely went into that with a different attitude and outlook.
Yeah, well, Rome wasn't built in a day. And thank you for sharing that. Specifically the hierarchy part, I just wanted to say, I can remember later in life when I finally left evangelical Christianity, began to be in spaces that were more expansive and welcoming. And these people didn't know me at all. And they clearly came into the beginning of the relationship assuming I had things to offer. I had spiritual treasures that they could benefit from. And it became obvious to me right away that they had a lot of treasures that I needed. And suddenly, like mutuality occurred for like the first time in my entire spiritual life, and no one up, one down relationships, no hierarchy. And it was like a rebirth for me. So thank you for the way you articulated that. I can relate.
Mm,
Um,
yeah.
and anyway, with that, thank you so much for sharing with us your insights and your story, both in the essay and here on the video. Anyone out there who missed the essay, the link will be below in the video description, along with the link to Melissa's Substack, where you can read more of her writing. Thank you so much for chatting today, Melissa.